You know that moment when you're scrolling through social media at 2 in the morning, seeing your college roommate posting pictures from their second vacation this year, and you can't help but wonder how everyone else seems to have their financial life figured out while you're still calculating whether you can afford both groceries and gas this week. Well, what if I told you that most of those people posting vacation photos are actually drowning in debt? And more importantly, what if I told you there are specific financial traps designed to keep our generation broke that nobody talks about? My name is Alex, and I spent over a decade in investment banking before walking away in my mid-30s to study wealth creation as a passion project. I've seen thousands of financial statements, worked with clients worth hundreds of millions, and mentored hundreds of people trying to build their first real wealth. And here's what nobody tells you about reaching your first $100,000. The biggest obstacles aren't what you think they are. Most financial advice focuses on budgeting apps or cutting out your morning coffee, but that's like trying to fix a sinking ship with duct tape. The real problem is that our entire generation has been systematically programmed to make financial decisions that feel smart in the moment but destroy wealth over time. These aren't accidents. They're carefully designed systems that profit from keeping you financially dependent. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why building your first 100,000 feels impossible. And more importantly, you'll know how to sidestep the traps that are keeping 90% of millennials stuck in financial mediocrity. But before we dive into these wealth destroyers, let me tell you something that might surprise you. The difference between someone who builds wealth and someone who stays broke isn't income. I've worked with software engineers making $200,000 a year who had less net worth than teachers making $40,000. The difference isn't intelligence, education, or even family background. The difference is recognizing and avoiding the specific financial traps that our generation faces. These traps are different from what previous generations dealt with because the entire economic landscape has shifted. Our parents could buy houses for 3 times their annual income. We're looking at houses that cost 8 to 10 times our income. Our parents had pension plans that guaranteed retirement income. We have 401k plans that shift all the risk onto us. Our parents could work at the same company for 30 years and retire with a gold watch and financial security. We're expected to reinvent our careers every 5 years just to keep up. But here's the thing that really gets me. Despite these massive structural changes, we're still getting the same outdated financial advice that worked in 1980 but is completely useless today. Save 10% of your income. Buy a house as soon as possible. Get a good job with benefits and stay there. This advice isn't just irrelevant anymore, it's actively harmful. The first trap that's keeping you from your first 100,000 is what I call the optimization trap. You've probably fallen into this one without even realizing it. It's the belief that small improvements and micro-optimizations are the key to building wealth. You download budgeting apps. You comparison shop for car insurance. You use cashback credit cards and hunt for coupon codes. You feel productive because you're actively managing your money, but your net worth barely moves. Here's why this approach fails. When you focus on optimizing small expenses, you're essentially trying to save your way to wealth, which is mathematically impossible for most people. Let's say you make $60,000 a year after taxes. Even if you could somehow cut your expenses by 20%, which would require massive lifestyle sacrifices, you'd save $12,000 annually. At that rate, it would take over 8 years just to save your first 100,000, assuming 0 market returns and 0 major unexpected expenses. But the real problem with the optimization trap isn't just the math, it's the psychological impact. When you spend all your mental energy tracking every dollar and optimizing every expense, you have no bandwidth left to focus on the activities that actually build wealth. You become so focused on not losing money that you never learn how to make money. I had a client who spent 2 hours every Sunday categorizing expenses in his budgeting app and researching better deals on his phone plan, internet service, and insurance. He was proud of saving maybe $50 per month through these efforts. But during that same time period, he turned down a freelance project that would have paid $3,000 because he was too busy optimizing his budget to take on extra work. This is the optimization trap in action. It makes you feel like you're being financially responsible while actually preventing you from building real wealth. The wealthy don't optimize their way to riches. They focus on increasing their income and making their money work for them through investments. The second trap is even more insidious because it's disguised as smart financial planning. I call it the milestone trap, and it's the belief that you need to hit certain financial milestones in a specific order before you can start building serious wealth. You know the sequence. First, pay off all your debt, then build an emergency fund, then max out your retirement accounts. Then save for a house down payment, then maybe you can start investing in other assets. This sounds logical on the surface, but it's actually a recipe for staying financially stuck. Here's why. By the time you've jumped through all these hoops, you've lost years of potential compound growth. And more importantly, you've trained yourself to think like a saver instead of like an investor. Let me give you a real example. Sarah, a marketing manager making $70,000 a year, followed this milestone approach religiously. She spent 2 years aggressively paying off her student loans. Then she spent another year building a 6-month emergency fund. Then she started maxing out her 401k. By the time she felt ready to start investing in other assets, she was 31 years old and had missed nearly a decade of potential wealth building. Meanwhile, her friend Jake took a completely different approach. He made minimum payments on his low-interest student loans while simultaneously investing in index funds and real estate. By age 31, Jake's net worth was over $200,000, while Sarah's was around $60,000, despite following all the conventional financial advice perfectly. The milestone trap keeps you playing defense with your money instead of playing offense. It prioritizes safety and predictability over growth and opportunity. But here's what financial advisors won't tell you. In today's economic environment, playing it safe is actually the riskiest strategy of all. The third trap might be the most expensive one, and it's something that affects almost every millennial I work with. It's the lifestyle inflation trap, but not in the way you think. Most people understand that spending more as you earn more can be problematic. What they don't realize is how subtle and systematic this trap has become. Previous generations experienced lifestyle inflation mainly when they got promotions or raises. Today, we experience it constantly through subscription services, social media influence, and what I call stealth upgrades. Your Netflix subscription starts at $8 a month, but then you add Disney Plus, Amazon Prime, Spotify Premium, and suddenly you're spending $60 monthly on entertainment subscriptions you barely use. Your phone plan gets upgraded automatically. Your insurance rates increase annually. Your gym membership renews at a higher rate. These aren't conscious spending decisions. They're death by 1,000 cuts, and they're specifically designed to be small enough that you won't notice them individually, but large enough to prevent wealth accumulation when combined. But the real killer is how social media amplifies lifestyle inflation pressure. You're constantly exposed to curated versions of other people's lives, and the pressure to keep up is relentless. Someone posts about their weekend getaway, so you book a trip you can't afford. Someone shows off their new gadget, so you upgrade your phone earlier than planned. The devastating part about the lifestyle inflation trap is that it grows with your income, ensuring you never get ahead no matter how much you earn. I've seen people go from making $40,000 to making $100,000 and somehow have less money available for investing because their lifestyle expanded to match their income. These three traps work together to create what I call the financial hamster wheel. You're always busy with money activities, you feel like you're making progress, but you never actually build meaningful wealth. Now here's where things get really interesting, and this is something that most people don't see coming until it's too late. There's a fourth trap that's arguably more dangerous than all the others combined, because it masquerades as the solution to your financial problems. I call it the education trap, and it's the belief that you need to become a financial expert before you can start building wealth. You've probably felt this yourself. You start researching investing, and suddenly you're drowning in information about price-to-earnings ratios, dividend yields, market cap analysis, and economic indicators. You read books about Warren Buffett's investment philosophy and try to understand complex options strategies. You follow financial podcasts and YouTube channels convinced that if you just learn enough, you'll crack the code to building wealth. Here's what actually happens. You spend months or even years consuming financial education content without ever actually investing a single dollar. You're paralyzed by the fear of making the wrong decision, so you keep learning and researching and planning, but you never take action. Meanwhile, inflation is eating away at your cash savings and you're missing out on years of potential compound growth. I had a client named Michael who spent 3 years studying real estate investing. He read dozens of books, attended seminars, joined online forums, and could speak intelligently about cap rates, cash-on-cash returns, and market analysis. But he never actually bought a property. When I asked him why, he said he didn't feel ready yet. He was waiting until he knew everything there was to know about real estate investing. The problem is, you'll never know everything. The markets are constantly changing and there's always more to learn. But while Michael was studying, property prices in his target market increased by 30%, effectively pricing him out of deals he could have afforded 3 years earlier. The education trap is particularly insidious because it feels productive. You're learning, you're growing your knowledge base, you're making informed decisions. But knowledge without action is worthless. The wealthy understand that you learn more from making one investment than you do from reading 10 books about investing. But here's the trap within the trap. The financial education industry profits from keeping you in learning mode forever. Think about it. If a course or book actually taught you everything you needed to know to build wealth quickly and effectively, you'd buy it once and never need another financial product. But if they keep you believing that you need just one more piece of information, one more strategy, one more certification, they can sell to you indefinitely. This connects directly to the 5th trap, which might be the most psychologically devastating of all. It's the comparison trap, and social media has turned it into a weapon of mass financial destruction. You're constantly comparing your behind-the-scenes reality to everyone else's highlight reel, and it's creating financial decisions based on image rather than substance. Your college friend posts photos from their new apartment, so you decide you need to move to a more expensive place. Someone in your network shares news about their promotion, so you start spending money to project success you don't actually have yet. You see people your age buying new cars, taking expensive vacations, or wearing designer clothes, and you assume they must be doing something financially that you're not. But here's what you don't see in those social media posts. The credit card debt funding those vacations. The car loans stretching 7 or 8 years. The apartment they can barely afford that's preventing them from saving anything. The designer clothes purchased with money that should have gone to retirement savings. The comparison trap doesn't just make you spend money you don't have. It makes you optimize for the wrong metrics entirely. Instead of focusing on net worth growth, you focus on lifestyle signaling. Instead of building assets that appreciate over time, you buy liabilities that make you look successful in the short term. I remember working with a client who was frustrated because she felt like she was behind all her peers financially. She made $75,000 a year but could barely save anything after her expenses. When we analyzed her spending, we found that she was spending over $1,500 monthly on things designed to project an image of success. Expensive dinners, designer handbags, premium gym memberships, and a luxury car payment. Meanwhile, her friend who seemed less successful on social media was quietly building wealth. He drove a reliable used car, lived in a modest apartment, and rarely posted about expensive purchases. But he was investing nearly 30% of his income and had accumulated over $80,000 in assets by age 29. The comparison trap creates a vicious cycle where you're constantly chasing an image of wealth, while simultaneously preventing yourself from building actual wealth. And the more you fall behind financially, the more pressure you feel to project success, which makes the problem worse. This leads us to the 6th trap, which is particularly relevant for our generation because we've been conditioned to believe it's financially responsible behavior. It's the safety trap, and it's the belief that avoiding financial risk is the path to financial security. You keep all your money in savings accounts because you're afraid of market volatility. You avoid investing in stocks because you heard stories about people losing money in market crashes. You won't consider real estate because you're worried about being a landlord or property values declining. You stick with your stable but low-paying job because leaving feels too risky. Here's the brutal truth about the safety trap. In today's economic environment, not taking financial risks is the riskiest strategy of all. With inflation running higher than savings account interest rates, keeping money in cash is a guaranteed way to lose purchasing power over time. A savings account paying 0.5% interest while inflation runs at 3% means you're losing 2.5% of your wealth annually. But the safety trap goes deeper than just investment decisions. It affects your entire approach to building wealth. You're so focused on not losing money that you never learn how to make money work for you. You prioritize preserving what you have over growing what you have, which ensures you'll never accumulate enough to achieve financial independence. The wealthy understand that the biggest risk is not taking enough risk. They know that inflation, taxes, and lifestyle inflation will erode their wealth if they don't actively grow it through investments and business opportunities. They're not reckless, but they're willing to accept calculated risks in exchange for potential returns. What makes these traps so effective is how they reinforce each other. The optimization trap makes you focus on small expenses, which leads to the milestone trap of thinking you need perfect financial hygiene before investing. The education trap keeps you in perpetual learning mode, while the comparison trap makes you spend money to project an image of success. The safety trap prevents you from taking the risks necessary to build real wealth. Together, these traps create what I call the financial quicksand effect. The harder you struggle using conventional financial advice, the deeper you sink into financial mediocrity. You feel like you're doing everything right, but your net worth barely grows, and financial independence feels further away each year. But here's where the story gets interesting, and this is probably the most important part of this entire video. These traps aren't permanent prisons. They're patterns of thinking and behavior that can be recognized and overcome once you understand how they work. The seventh trap is one that I see destroying more wealth than almost any other factor, and it's particularly devastating for millennials because we've been programmed to believe it's actually smart financial behavior. I call it the debt optimization trap, and it's the obsessive focus on managing debt instead of building assets. You've probably fallen into this one if you've ever spent hours researching the perfect debt payoff strategy. Should you use the debt snowball method or the debt avalanche method? Should you consolidate your loans? Should you refinance your student loans? Should you pay extra principal on your mortgage? These questions consume enormous amounts of mental energy and create the illusion that you're being financially proactive. But here's what's really happening. While you're optimizing your debt payments, you're missing opportunities to build wealth that could dwarf the interest you're saving. Let me give you a concrete example. I worked with a client named David who had $40,000 in student loans at 4% interest. He was making extra payments to pay off these loans faster, putting an additional $300 monthly toward the principal. David felt great about this strategy because he was saving money on interest and would be debt-free sooner. But over that same time period, the stock market was generating average annual returns of 8 to 10%. If David had invested that extra $300 monthly instead of using it for loan payments, he would have built significantly more wealth over the long term. The debt optimization trap keeps you thinking like someone who's trying to minimize losses instead of someone who's trying to maximize gains. It's defensive financial thinking in a game where offense wins. The wealthy don't optimize their debt. They leverage debt strategically to acquire appreciating assets while maintaining their liquidity for investment opportunities. This mindset shift is crucial because it affects how you view every financial decision. When you're trapped in debt optimization mode, you see debt as the enemy that must be eliminated at all costs. When you think like a wealth builder, you see debt as a tool that can be used strategically to accelerate wealth creation. The eighth trap might be the most subtle, but it's also one of the most expensive over time. It's what I call the convenience trap. And it's how small, seemingly insignificant purchases compound into massive wealth destroyers over decades. This isn't about the typical advice to cut out your daily coffee. The convenience trap is much more sophisticated than that. It's the subscription economy that's designed to extract small amounts of money from you consistently without you noticing. But it's also the thousand small decisions you make every week that prioritize convenience over wealth building. You order food delivery instead of cooking because you're tired after work. You buy coffee at the office instead of making it at home because you're running late. You pay for premium parking instead of walking a few extra blocks because it's more convenient. You hire someone to clean your house instead of doing it yourself because your time is valuable. Each of these decisions seems rational in isolation. The problem is when you multiply these convenience purchases across every area of your life and compound them over decades. That $15 food delivery order 3 times a week costs you over $2,000 annually. Invested at 8% returns, that's nearly $250,000 over 30 years. But the convenience trap goes deeper than just the direct financial cost. It's training your brain to choose immediate gratification over long-term wealth building. Every time you choose the convenient option over the wealth-building option, you're reinforcing neural pathways that prioritize short-term comfort over long-term financial success. I had a client who calculated that she was spending over $800 monthly on various convenience purchases: food delivery, ride shares instead of public transportation, premium services she could do herself, and impulse purchases to save time. When we redirected that money toward investments, her wealth accumulation accelerated dramatically. The convenience trap is particularly dangerous for high earners because they can afford these small luxuries without feeling immediate financial pain. But those small luxuries add up to enormous opportunity costs over time. The person making $100,000 who spends an extra $1,000 monthly on convenience is giving up millions in potential wealth over their career. The 9th trap is something that affects almost every millennial I work with, and it's become worse as our careers have become more unpredictable. It's the emergency fund trap, and it's the belief that you need enormous cash reserves before you can start investing seriously. Traditional financial advice suggests keeping 3 to 6 months of expenses in an emergency fund. For someone with monthly expenses of $4,000, that's $12,000 to $24,000 sitting in a savings account earning practically nothing. That's money that could be working for you in the markets, generating real returns over time. But the emergency fund trap goes beyond just the opportunity cost of keeping too much cash. It creates a scarcity mindset where you're constantly preparing for financial disaster instead of positioning yourself for financial growth. You become so focused on what could go wrong that you never take the calculated risks necessary to build significant wealth. The wealthy understand that the best emergency fund is a diversified portfolio of liquid investments, multiple income streams, and access to credit when needed. They don't keep massive amounts of cash sitting idle because they understand that inflation and opportunity cost make cash a depreciating asset over time. I'm not suggesting you should have zero emergency savings, but keeping more than 3 months of expenses in cash is usually overkill, especially if you have stable income and good credit. That extra money could be working for you in index funds or other liquid investments that historically outpace inflation. The 10th trap is perhaps the most psychologically complex, and it's something that our generation struggles with more than previous generations. It's the identity trap, and it's how your financial decisions become tangled with your sense of self-worth and social identity. You might identify as someone who's good with money, which makes you reluctant to take investment risks that could result in losses. You might identify as someone who's responsible and conservative, which prevents you from pursuing aggressive wealth-building strategies. You might identify as someone who doesn't care about money, which becomes an excuse for not managing it effectively. The identity trap creates cognitive dissonance when your wealth-building goals conflict with your self-image. If you see yourself as someone who's not materialistic, pursuing financial independence might feel like betraying your values. If you see yourself as risk-averse, investing in growth assets might feel uncomfortable even when it's the rational choice. I worked with a client who identified strongly as an environmentally conscious person. She wanted to build wealth but felt conflicted about investing in index funds that included companies she disagreed with morally. This identity conflict prevented her from investing for years, costing her significant wealth-building opportunities. Look, recognizing these traps is just the first step. The real transformation happens when you stop playing defense with your money and start playing offense. Your first 100,000 won't come from optimizing expenses or following conventional advice. It'll come from thinking differently, taking calculated risks, and focusing on building assets instead of managing liabilities. The choice is yours. You can keep falling for the same traps that keep everyone else broke, or you can break free and actually build the wealth you deserve.